बहुत गौरव की बात है कि मुल्क राज आनंद जी ने अपनी धरोहर का संग्रह इंदिरा गांधी राष्ट्रीय कला केंद्र को भेंट किया, और ये उनकी जो वसीयत थी उसमें लिखा गया था। और हमारे लिए भी ये आश्चर्य का विषय था कि उन्होंने अपनी वसीयत में कला केंद्र को ही अपना औपचारिक रूप से अपना वारिस बताते हुए अपनी सारी धरोहर सौंपी थी। और कुछ न्यायिक प्रक्रिया के बाद हमको वो धरोहर पूरी प्राप्त हो गई। और इसमें जो हमारे सहयोगी प्रोफेसर रमेश चंद्र गौर जी ने बहुत मेहनत भी की, और एक तरह का प्रयास भी, जो कि न्यायिक प्रक्रिया हम सब जानते हैं थोड़ी जटिल होती है, उसके बावजूद हम सब इस बारे में आश्वस्त थे कि अंततः वो धरोहर हमारे पास आएगी। और जब हमने वो सारी धरोहर देखी तो हम सच में बहुत आश्चर्यचकित थे, क्योंकि जिस तरह का संग्रह था वो सिर्फ पुस्तकों का संग्रह नहीं था। हमें तो लगा था कि ज़्यादातर किताबें ही हैं या कुछ दस्तावेज हैं, लेकिन उसमें कुछ बहुत नायाब ऐसे आर्टिफैक्ट्स भी हैं, बहुत रेयर और बहुत नायाब आर्टिफैक्ट्स भी हैं। और जो दस्तावेज़ हैं उसमें ऐसे बड़े बड़े महान लोगों के साथ के पत्र व्यवहार हैं, जिसके साथ एक इतिहास का नया पन्ना खुल सकता है, या इतिहास की कुछ नई चीज़ें हमारे सामने उद्घाटित हो सकती हैं। हम सब जानते हैं कि मुल्क राज आनंद जी का समाज के अलग अलग वर्गों के साथ बहुत सरोकार रहा, सामाजिक सरोकार के लिए वो हमेशा लड़ते रहे। उन्होंने उसके वर्ग संघर्ष को लेकर बहुत सारी चीज़ें लिखी हैं, और एक अलग तरह के वो लेखक थे, अलग तरह के वो विचारक भी थे, एक्टिविस्ट भी थे। और इसलिए उनका संग्रह कला केंद्र में आना हम सब के लिए बहुत गर्व की बात है, गौरव की बात है। और जैसा कि हम सब जानते हैं, कला केंद्र की ये परंपरा रही है कि हमने जैसी भी विभूतियों का संग्रह हमें प्राप्त होता है, उनके स्मृति में उनको स्मरण करते हुए हम एक स्मारक व्याख्यान आयोजित करते हैं। इसलिए ये पहला स्मारक व्याख्यान है जो हम आयोजित कर रहे हैं।
We all know that Mulk Raj Anand, a multifaceted personality, considered the founding father of English novels in India. But he was equally renowned and known as an art historian. And since inception of IGNCA, he was very closely associated with IGNCA in different activities. And we have lot of communication engaging Mr. Mulk Raj Anand and the founding academic member secretary of IGNCA, Dr. Kapila Vasyan, talking about various journeys. And this part of collection which has been received by us, I just give you some brief idea so you may know more about that. But before going for that, just few words about Mulk Raj Anand, who has published about 70 books, and he was more known for path-breaking novels such as Untouchable and Coolie, which was published in 1935 and 36. And a collection what we have received in the Kalanidhi IGNCA, we have about 1,000 books, which are going to be added as a personal collection in Kalanidhi Reference Library. And we have 153 pieces of artifacts which are going to be part of Cultural Archive collection. And in these artifacts, we have a lot of personal letters, documents, his correspondences with the various political leaders of before independence and after independence, including some foreign leaders, including Mujibur Rahman, and a lot of honors and awards received by him. And there are certain paintings, there are certain kind of like paintings received by him as a gift, as sculptures, and there are a lot of sculptures which are very precious and very rare in nature, like we have this Jain Tirthankara representation in metal, a Buddha Krishna sculpture. We also have some Burli paintings and some other paper material. So all these collections which we have received, and as our member secretary has mentioned, that definitely we have a plan to have more discussion and exhibitions. Please visit our library and you will find this wealth of personal collection, both in personal library as well as this cultural archive, which also have 45 personal collections.
मुल्क राज आनंद की सबसे बड़ी विशेषता, शैलीगत विशेषता ये थी कि लिखते वो अंग्रेजी में थे और कई बार जानबूझ के उसका असर ऐसा होता था कि जैसे पंजाबी में लिख रहे हैं। वो ये जानबूझ के ऐसा करते थे। उन्होंने पहले लेखक हैं हमारे जिन्होंने एक हमारी भाषा, इस मिट्टी की भाषा विदेशी भाषा में इतनी खूबी से समाहित की कि उनके बड़े बड़े कारनामों में से है। So what I'll do is, as I said, the title of my lecture. I'm sorry, I should say one more thing. I think the date that was proposed to me for this lecture was actually yesterday. That is his birthday. I'm very, very sorry that yesterday I was speaking somewhere else. I had another engagement, the launch of a festival for someone. So I could only come today. But I hope that my mistake will be corrected in future lectures and it will be held on the 12th. He was the forgiving soul, Mulk Raj Anand. So he will forgive the delay by one day this year. The first thing to say is to show off, which is that I actually met the man a couple of times. You know, there are people here sitting there in the front row who have known Mulk Raj Anand forever, since they were children. And I've just been talking to them, and I hope that they will write down their own recollections and their impressions and their memoirs. Because what we need very much and what we are not very good at is writing authoritative, fact-based biographies of our great men. And even if nobody feels confident at the moment that they know Mulk Raj Anand well enough to write a whole biography, if people who knew him write about what they knew about him, it could be pieced together, it could be coordinated, it could be drawn upon as time goes by. But if they do not do it, then it may be lost. It may just be gone. So I've been pleading with them to begin writing, if not today, tomorrow, and I hope that they will do so. When I met him, it was the 1980s, and we were at a conference together. I was an office bearer for about 20 years of an association, as you heard, called the Indian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies. And there were other conferences too where he and I met briefly. And the first thing I noticed was about him, of course he wore a kurta, a very fine silk kurta much of the time. And there were some foreign delegates in our conference, including some ladies. And what he would do was, when they came to talk to him, with ladies, he would bend down and take their hand and in the French fashion, kiss the hand. So that's something he would do. Great courtesy, great French kind of courtesy. Even the British do not do that. He had a kind of sophistication in his personal conduct, which was quite remarkable. Nobody else did that. No other Indian I've known who would do that regularly as a form of greeting. Once he and I were sitting next to each other because we'd been waiting for the main speaker to come. This was in 1987, it must be, the Jawaharlal Nehru Centenary Conference at the Nehru Memorial, at the very center of Nehru Studies. And the President of India was to come and make the inaugural speech, and we were waiting outside the auditorium there. And he and I got to talk to, there were mainly historians there, British and Indian historians and so on, not many literary people. And I had met him before, so I went up to him and we began talking. And then as we went in, he and I sat next to each other. And the President was speaking, and in the middle of the speech about Nehru and his great contribution, he quoted at some length a passage which he told us was from Mulk Raj Anand. What a moment! In the centenary occasion, the President of India, I think it was Venkatraman at that time, but it may have been someone else. And I happened to know the secretary to the President at that time, and I knew who had written that speech, and I knew how well read that man was, and it was Gopal Krishna Gandhi. He was the secretary, an extremely widely read man, of course. So at the end of the speech, after Jan Gana Man, as always happens when the President has spoken, I turned to Mulk Raj Anand and I said, "Sir, that was a wonderful piece of writing that he quoted. Where was that from? Which book?" And he smiled and he put his hand on my arm and he said, "I have forgotten." He had written so much. He was very disarming about it. He has written so many books. He was such a prolific author in all kinds of subjects. And Nehru, of course, was his hero. So that's one. And the last thing that I'd like to tell you is very fetching indeed, very, very winsome. He had evolved a canon of the Indian novel in Indian languages plus English. And he had formed a kind of saptarshi of Indian novelists in English, the greatest Indian novelists. And he would let everyone know who the 7 greatest Indian novelists were. And he had his own wonderfully forthright way of naming them. He would say there's 7. The 2 Chatterjees, the 2 Banerjees, Tagore, Premchand, and myself. It was so wonderful. I mean, the way he put it, I'm sure he could not always remember who the 2 Chatterjees were and who the 2 Banerjees were. But he had got that right. It conceded 5 of the slots to Bengalis, Tagore as well, and then Premchand, and then myself. He would say without any self-consciousness. The interesting thing is that he may actually be amongst the all-time canon, if not 7, perhaps a little larger number, of writers, of Indian novelists in English. So if he was exaggerating, it was not by much. Now, what's his great claim to fame? There has been Indian writing in English, mainly poetry, in the 19th century as well. And there have been some novels even before Mulk Raj Anand. But Mulk Raj Anand, R.K. Narayan, and Raja Rao, they all rose in the 1930s with major novels that they published. And these novels set up Indian writing in English, especially the Indian novel in English, in a way that could no longer be ignored in the West or in India. Before that, there were isolated performances, some poems, some novels, and so on, and they didn't add up to anything. But they formed the great trinity within 5 years of each other. They all published major books. And within those 5 years, while the others published 1 book each, Mulk Raj Anand published 3 books, one after the other. So he was, in a very substantial sense, the founder of the Indian novel in English, which has since flourished and flourished without end. That's his great historical importance. But there is also a thematic importance. The thematic importance is that a person writing in English, especially then, was very likely to write about people who speak in English, people who live their lives in English, even if they are Indian. Not Mulk Raj Anand. Mulk Raj Anand chose for his theme and for his protagonists characters from the lowest sections of society and wrote about them in English. This was a double innovation in a way. I'm sure, there are Hindi novels. There is Rangabhoomi, published 1925, January 1925, by Premchand, in which the main character, the blind beggar, is as low as it gets in society. So, in Hindi and the indigenous languages, yes, of course. That's another kind of playing field. That's another Rangabhumi, even for novelists. But in English, for somebody to come along and write his first novel, Untouchable, about an untouchable boy, Baka, who goes through one day in his life. At the end of the life, Gandhi just happens to be visiting that city, and Gandhi delivers a speech which is full of concern about the untouchables. Gandhi did more about the untouchables than almost anybody else in the history of in our modern history. And then, that's not the end of the novel. The novel proceeds beyond that. And there is some discussion by young men who've been to listen to Gandhi, and they decide that Gandhi's solution to the problem of untouchability is not the solution. The solution lies in modern new technology. And what is this new technology? It is the flush toilet. It's the flush toilet that will solve the problem of scavenging which the untouchables were ordained to perform by the fact that they were born in that caste. So what is happening? There is Gandhi, and there is clearly materialism inspired by Marxism. And there is a conjunction of these two factors in this wonderful new novel in a way that only Anand could have achieved. So there was stylistic innovation, as I pointed out. It's set in Punjab, so a lot of Punjabi coming through the English. And there is another kind of stylistic or structural element in that which needs to be pointed out. The novel is confined to just one day in the life of the protagonist. Which other novels can we think of which are confined to just one day? In the year 1922, James Joyce published his Ulysses, which is just one day. In 1925, Virginia Woolf published Mrs. Dalloway, which is also confined to just one day. So where does the idea of one day come from? It comes from the fact that from the mid-1920s up to the mid-1940s, give or take a home visit now and then, Mulk Raj Anand had lived in England. Mulk Raj Anand had lived in England and supported himself through a huge variety of roles. He got research grants from the highest bodies, grant-giving bodies, like the Rhodes House. Mulk Raj Anand was supported in this by the patron saint of all Indian writers in English at that time, who was E.M. Forster. E.M. Forster actually read a manuscript of Untouchable, which had been rejected by 19 publishers. And he read it, and he wrote a recommendation letter, and he also was willing to write a foreword if some publisher came forward, and he recommended that for publication. And Lawrence and Wishart, which were then, I think, Wishart, they were left-leaning publishers, and they published it under Forster's recommendation. But Forster wrote not only that foreword, Forster also wrote, I've seen the file in Oxford on Mulk Raj Anand, and all the grants that he applied for, and some that he got, and most that he didn't. And Forster wrote so many that he got a bit tired of writing recommendations for Mulk Raj Anand. So in one letter by Forster to a friend, not to a grant-giving body, he said, Mulk of Cow was here again. This is very insulting. This is very patronizing. But he wrote that, and there it is. It's a historical fact. He's doing many favors to Mulk Raj Anand, but he's also saying this. So that was the first novel. There's one other story, which I think is the key story. When he had finished the draft, Anand came to India, and he thought he'd show it to Gandhiji. And he went to Wardha, I think it was. Already, yes, of course it was. No, Sabarmati. Wardha was established after the Salt March. Sabarmati it was. And he went there, and Gandhi had one look at him. He said, come and live in the ashram for some time. So he said, yes, of course, I'll come and live. So Gandhi had a look at him and he said, Anand had come from London. So he said, you'll have to take your nice jacket off if you want to come and live here. You'll have to stop smoking. You will have to stop drinking. You will have to get up when all of us get up. You will have to have the food that we have. You will have to conform to all the rules of the ashram. And for a few days, Anand did that. And Gandhi had a look at the manuscript. And Gandhi said, you're writing about a poor man in the latest literary style that is prevalent in London. Because that was stream of consciousness. So Gandhi made that fundamental suggestion to Mulk Raj Anand, and he went back and he rewrote the novel, and that's the form in which it has been published. His next novel was called Coolie. It's not the Amitabh Bachchan kind of coolie. No. It's not a railway station coolie. It is the coolie in the hills who carries a huge load on his back tied to his forehead. That's the coolie. And he's 15 years old. And under the sheer exploitation, if you like, and deprivations in his life, he gets more and more ill. And he dies in early deaths. So that's another area of exploitation and oppression of the poor that he depicted in that novel. And for the third novel, he went to an entirely different setting. He went to the tea gardens, Chai Bagan, and he depicted the life of how those tea pickers and other laborers there were utterly exploited and sat upon now by the British, because they were mostly the owners. 2 Leaves and a Bud is the title. I found out from that novel that that is what tea pickers pick. 2 leaves and a bud. That's all that they can pick. Nothing else will do. So with great authenticity, he wrote these. In the later part of his career, even earlier in London, because he had to make a living somehow, he would write on those grants. He would write anything that people who were giving him the grant would want him to write. He wrote a book called The Hindu View of Art, which was, the title echoes The Hindu View of Life by Radhakrishnan, which had been quite popular then. He wrote a book even on cooking, because he'd worked in a restaurant on Indian cooking. He wrote that. He wrote books on art then. As I said, anybody who funded him to write a certain kind of work, he would do that. Great variety, great versatility. Later, he began writing other kinds of things, other kinds of novels. He came back to India. He'd already married an English woman there, Kathleen, and he had a child, Sushila Anand, who was herself a writer. We were talking about her. I learned a few new things about her only just before the lecture. She remained in England. And then when he came back, he married a dancer, a classical dancer in Bombay, Shireen Wajifdar. And he, at about that time, also founded Marg, which is a tremendous contribution. What a terrific art magazine, unprecedented in India, that he started, which is still going strong. I mean, issues of Marg, and special issues of Marg, are each one of them what is called collector's items, and invaluable sources of knowledge in that particular field to which they're devoted. He became more and more of an artist in his tastes to go with being a writer. Art of all kinds. He's bequeathed an art collection to this wonderful center, not only written papers and books. So that's also part of his personality. And he became, of course, a public figure. He was invited to, he actually held a job in the history of art, I think, at the Punjab University in Chandigarh, who had a chair, very innovative thing on their part. They had a chair in history of Indian art, which was later filled by B.N. Goswami, who has recently passed away. So he did, totally versatile talent he was, and he did a number of things throughout his life which were innovative. He was very good at answering letters. I don't know whether the collected letters of Mulk Raj Anand can ever be published. It will have to be a selection. Because he had this wonderful English habit of answering each letter that he got. Here we don't even answer emails. I mean, we Indians are very relaxed about this. कि अगर जवाब नहीं देंगे तो क्या होगा? वो फिर लिखेगा. अगर सचमुच उसको काम होगा तो फिर लिखेगा. और वो भी हम जवाब नहीं देंगे तो आ जाएगा, मिलने आ जाएगा. You know, that's our attitude. And no punctuality. If you answer a letter immediately, Gandhi did the same. Why? Gandhi was also an agrarian by training. He had spent many years in England. Tagore did not. Tagore also lived in England, but only for one year or 1 year and a half. And he could not even get admitted to a university. He did so poorly in studies. Thank God he did. Otherwise, he'd have been a lawyer. And we would have missed all his great works. So, Mulk Raj Anand had many aspects to his personality. A British one, an Indian one, and not Indian alone. Punjabi, earthy Indian. And the sophistication of Bloomsbury. Later in life, he wrote a book called Conversations in Bloomsbury, which I'm not very happy about. Because the way he knew people in Bloomsbury, but in the book, he also talks about Aldous Huxley, he talks about D.H. Lawrence, whom Bloomsbury would not have touched with a barge pole. They were there, they were British writers, but they were not part of Bloomsbury. What he meant by Bloomsbury in his late age, recollecting his British experiences, was a much broader thing than Bloomsbury alone. So, all these three great writers, to assess in a very broad way, to outline in a broad way his achievement in this last part of what I have to say, there are two ways of looking at it. One is, as I said earlier, as one of the three founders of Indian writing in English, which established a new discipline of writing, a new category of writing. Not only sporadic works. It was not only Mulk Raj Anand, it was the God above inspiring three great writers to begin publishing within 5 years, in the latter half. And what a galaxy they are. They are still taught in all the universities of India and in many universities abroad. And the galaxy, the Trinity, the power of the Trinity lies in the fact, which is also accidental, no plan behind it except God's plan, which is that they all wrote very, very differently. Different style, different themes, different preoccupations. They had different life trajectories. At the age of 19, Raja Rao went to France to study. He married a French woman. R.K. Narayan never went abroad at all until the age of 55. He lived in Mysore. He had his Malgudi. He is perhaps, one must say, at the popular non-literary level, the common people out there, especially after the adaptation of Malgudi days, R.K. Narayan continues to be the most popular of the three. Mulk Raj Anand is the most radical of the three, of all these three writers. And R.K. Narayan is, quote unquote, Raja Rao is the most philosophical. He spent his later days at the University of Texas as a professor of philosophy. He also had stopped writing novels long back. Now, in the Commonwealth Association, of which I was an office bearer, one thing that we always did was to celebrate centenaries of major authors by holding a conference on them. And all these three writers gave us a very tough time. Mulk Raj Anand, R.K. Narayan, and Raja Rao. They all lived to be 90 plus, I think. So there was a danger that they might be present at their own centenary conference and might give the keynote address. ये अंग्रेजी में लिखने वाले पता नहीं किस चक्की का आटा खाते थे. But they were all three of them extremely long-lived, which is a wonderful thing for all of us. But this is a coincidence. So he died at 98, getting on 99, Mulk Raj Anand, in 2004. And it's a wonderful thing for all of us who met him in his later stage of his life to have that privilege. The last thing I would say is the ways of history, even the ways of literary history, are quite strange and unpredictable. There are two examples of it to be derived from Mulk Raj Anand's own life. And the first is, suppose he had begun publishing his novels as he did in 1935. 35, 36, 37, three novels. Dhar. There's enterprise for you. There's dedication for you. And on three very different themes, as I just outlined. Had he done just that, he would still have made a tremendous contribution. But the ways of literary history are that 1 year afterwards, R.K. Narayan published his first book. And 2 years after that, Kantapura by Raja Rao was published. That gave that kind of writing a critical mass. One swallow could not have made a summer, however big. So these are the ways of literary history, which we can look back in retrospect. So that's one example of the ways of literary history which affected Mulk Raj Anand, his career and his reputation. This is right at the beginning of his career. At the end of his career, another strange quirk of literary history happened. Salman Rushdie came up. Salman Rushdie came up and won the Booker Prize. And one wonderful thing about his Indians is, we had never heard of the Booker Prize before Salman Rushdie won it. But once he had won it, and once we found out there is a big foreign prize, then Salman Rushdie became almost like a Nobel Prize winner. He was acclaimed so highly by all of us because he was acclaimed highly in the West. These are our ways even now. We had never heard of the International Booker Prize until Gitanjali Sri won it. We did not know who's winning it in the world. But that is our cultural state. What did the emergence of Salman Rushdie and after that Vikram Seth and Amitabh Ghosh and Arundhati Roy and Jhumpa Lahiri and all the others do to Mulk Raj Anand? What they did was, आपको पता है बीरबल की लकीर क्या होती है? बीरबल लकीर खींची बहुत अच्छी थी, किसी ने खींची बहुत बड़ी थी, उसको छोटा करना था, बिना लकीर को छुए छोटा करना था. तो बीरबल was the only person who could do it. वो गए और उन्होंने उसके नीचे एक और लंबी लकीर खींच दी, तो पहली लकीर छोटी हो गई. सलमान रुश्दी ने मुल्क राज आनंद के साथ वही किया, और मुल्क राज आनंद के साथ ही नहीं, R.K. नारायण और राजा राव के साथ भी, इन तीनों के साथ. From the 1930s up to the end of the 70s, there were the three uncrowned kings of Indian writing in English. In fact, they were the crowned kings. They were as different from each other as Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. I will not try and explain who was which. It will not fit. But that's the status that they had. And then there was Pralay. And Shiva seemed to construct a new universe, a post-colonial universe. And there, Rushdie and all the others came flooding along and redefining a literary climate. But one good thing about literature is, unlike in the sciences, unlike even in history, writers live forever. If they are good, they live forever. They cannot be eclipsed. Premchand remains Premchand. Tagore remains Tagore. Tulsidas remains Tulsidas. Kalidas remains Kalidas. So there is a place for them. There is a place for these important writers, not only in our syllabi that we continue to teach, but also in our hearts and also on our sensibility if we go back to read them. And I think Mulk Raj Anand certainly is one of the writers, not only in Indian writing in English, but broadly even in Indian writing full stop. The two Banerjees, the two Chatterjees, the two Banerjees, Tagore, Premchand, and myself. He was not far off. I mean, one loves the assertion. It's so innocent and it's so childlike in so many ways. But as I said, he has a claim to lasting, enduring fame in our literature, not only in English, but also beyond.
मुझे एक बार डॉक्टर नामवर सिंह जी ने हरीश त्रिवेदी जी के बारे में बताया, क्योंकि ये अंग्रेजी के ऐसे प्रोफेसर हैं जिन्होंने हिंदी साहित्यकारों को अंग्रेजी के पाठ्यक्रम में दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय में शामिल किया। और अभी एक तद्भव नाम की पत्रिका है जिसमें ये हिंदी में लिख रहे हैं और प्रयागवाद पर लिख रहे हैं। तो मुझे लगा कि प्रयाग शुक्ल पर तो नहीं लिख रहे हैं, लेकिन सचमुच प्रयाग में जो साहित्यिक परंपरा थी उस पर लिख रहे हैं और शायद 2 या 3 अंकों में छपा है। अभी जब मैंने त्रिवेदी जी से इसकी चर्चा की तो उन्होंने कहा कि अब मैं परिमल पर आ गया हूँ। प्रयाग में एक परिमल नाम की साहित्यिक संस्था थी, उसके शायद आखिरी व्यक्ति जीवित हैं वो बिशन टंडन है। और बिशन टंडन भी मेरा ख्याल है कि 95-97 की उम्र के हैं। IAS अफसर रहे हैं, प्रधानमंत्री कार्यालय में रहे हैं, इंदिरा गांधी के कार्यालय में रहे हैं। वाजपेयी जी जब पहली बार प्रधानमंत्री बने तो उन्होंने पद की शपथ लेने से पहले ही बिशन टंडन को फ़ोन किया और कहा कि आप मेरे साथ आ जाइए, और बिशन टंडन गए। 13 दिन वो प्रधानमंत्री के प्रमुख सचिव थे। मेरा उनसे बहुत मिलना जुलना है और संभवतः अशोक वाजपेयी को सब लोग जानते हैं। अशोक वाजपेयी पता नहीं ऑफिस में हिंदी में लिखते थे या नहीं, लेकिन बिशन टंडन ऑफिस का काम छोड़ दीजिए तो वह हिंदी में लिखते थे। और उन्होंने जो प्रधानमंत्री कार्यालय में डायरी लिखी वो हिंदी में लिखी थी, मूल हिंदी में है। जब वो बिरला फाउंडेशन के सेक्रेटरी थे या निदेशक थे तो एक दिन मुझे उन्होंने कहा कि ये ज़रा मेरी डायरी पढ़ो और बताओ कि क्या करना है। तो इंदिरा गांधी के कार्यालय में यानी प्रधानमंत्री के कार्यालय में वो 11 साल ज्वाइंट सेक्रेटरी थे। और उन दिनों का पूरा विवरण किसी को अगर जानना हो और इंदिरा गांधी के बारे में जो उनके अनुमान हैं वो जानना हो तो आप उस डायरी को पढ़ेंगे तो रोज़, तब सिद्धार्थ शंकर रे जो है वो चीफ मिनिस्टर थे पश्चिम बंगाल के, और उनके साथ जो उनका PS आता था तो वो विशन टंडन के कमरे में आकर बैठ जाता था। और उस समय प्रोफेसर पीएल धर प्रधानमंत्री के प्रिंसिपल सेक्रेटरी होते थे, तो और सब राजनीति की बात करनी होती थी तो प्रोफेसर पीएल धर भी विशन टंडन के कमरे में आ जाते थे। मैं ये सब इसलिए बता रहा हूँ कि उसी परंपरा में प्रोफेसर हरीश त्रिवेदी भी हैं, लेकिन आज इन्होंने बड़ा अन्याय किया। पता नहीं क्यों, ये किस मूड में इन्होंने अंग्रेजी में भाषण किया। इनको मुल्क राज आनंद के बारे में उसी तरह से बोलना चाहिए जैसे ये तद्भव में लिख रहे हैं। लेकिन हमको संतोष है कि इनको सुनने के बाद मुल्क राज आनंद के बारे में हम लोग अधिक जान सके, उनके साहित्यिक, उनके सामाजिक योगदान के बारे में जान सके और उस परंपरा को भी जान सके जो उनके समय था। मैं इस बात से तो सहमत नहीं हूँ कि सलमान रुश्दी ने वो तिकड़ी को तोड़ा। सलमान रुश्दी अलग कैटेगरी है और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि मुल्क राज आनंद अपने कन्विक्शन से लिखते थे या जीते थे।
आप सभी को धन्यवाद करने से पहले मैं एक जानकारी शेयर करना चाहूँगा, क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ मंच पर हमारे प्रेसिडेंट और मेंबर सेक्रेटरी दोनों ही विराजमान हैं। आज मुझे एक जानकारी मिली कि मुल्क राज आनंद जी का एक बड़ा पार्ट कलेक्शन का ऑलरेडी नेशनल आर्काइव में काफ़ी पहले डोनेट किया गया था और उस कलेक्शन की अभी तक कोई डिटेल कहीं पर भी उनके कैटलॉग में या कहीं पर मैंने तो नज़र नहीं आई। मैंने आज उसको कंफर्म भी किया नेशनल आर्काइव से, उनके पास वो कलेक्शन का एक बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा ऑलरेडी है। और दोनों ही संस्थाएं, नेशनल आर्काइव और आईजीएनसी, मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ कल्चर का ही पार्ट है। तो हम कोशिश करेंगे कि अगर दोनों कलेक्शन को एक डिजिटल फॉर्म में ही एक्सचेंज होकर एक जगह पर, और आईजीएनसी जैसी जगह पर अगर रहता है वो कलेक्शन का पूरा हिस्सा, तो इजीली एक्सेसिबल रहेगा इस रिसर्चर के लिए। तो उसके लिए भी हम प्रयास करेंगे आपके सहयोग से, जिससे कि मुल्क राज आनंद जी की जो पूरी की पूरी असेट्स है, जो हेरिटेज है, जो उनका पूरा कलेक्शन है, मार्क जिसके बारे में जानकारी अभी प्रोफेसर त्रिवेदी ने बताई, उसका पूरा कलेक्शन डिजिटाइज हो चुका है और वो बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट मैगज़ीन है। उसका एक पूरा का पूरा जो डिजिटाइज डेटाबेस है वो हमारे पास अवेलेबल है। थैंक यू वेरी मच।